Looked up just a second ago and I saw Johnny Conley with the fan. I thought if Johnny's hot on the second row, so we're going to go from down here instead. As you will recall, on Sunday evenings, the first Sunday, I guess not really the first Sunday, the second Sunday is the way it's been, throughout the last few months, we've talked about characteristics of a Christian. We've talked about a few different things, honesty, humility, some things like that. And we've used as our reference verses from the Bible. We've used examples of people who show those characteristics, and then we've decided that it would be best to model ourselves in the same way. So we can start or establish our learning will come from the Bible. If you have a hard copy of the Bible in hand or in front of you on the pew, I want you to take hold of that copy right now. Those of you that might pull out a phone or a tablet of some kind, it's not going to work for you for here. But if you're holding a Bible, I can look around and I can see that there's a bunch of different versions. I see some black covers, some with brown covers, some darker, some lighter, some what appear to be gold pages around the edge, some white, some silver, some gray. There's all different Bibles in hand. The size of the book can be kind of daunting. Let me think about it for a second. That this Bible that I have has 1,400 pages of Scripture. Yours probably has something similar to that, but it probably depends on the size of the font and some other factors as well. Every one of your Bibles has 66 books in them. Every one of them has 1,189 chapters in them. And translations vary slightly, but I suspect most of us probably either have a King James or a New King James, and that's what I looked up. But the New King James Version has 770,430 words. Counted them all this week. I was busy. Just kidding. Somebody counted them, though. That's crazy. 770,000 words. For reference, a typical novel, and I know we got some people that'll read a novel, a typical novel has between 70 and 100,000 words. So, a book that you would go to the library and check out or to the bookstore and buy that's going to entertain you as you read is about 7 to 10 times smaller than is the Bible. I guarantee you there are people in this room who would say right now, oh, I don't think I could ever read a whole book all the way through. Well, you might say that, but this is a pretty good sized book. But I understand your point. I completely understand your point. And it is somewhat impractical to read the entire Bible as a group. I saw something last week, July the 4th, but every July 4th on the island of Nantucket, they get together at the town hall and they read the community, they read through the entire Declaration of Independence. It's about 4 pages long in the school textbook, so it's not a huge document, but different people read different parts. I've known of churches who have read through the entire Bible over, I don't know how long it takes, a week or a month or whatever it does, but it's a really challenging task, right? And so when we think about that, if we were to read through starting on page 1 and going to page 1,400, a teacher and you read through this and have a teacher point out everything you should and shouldn't do, that would be really difficult, right? How many of you feel like by the time we hit about the 7th hour of that, you'd be losing focus pretty easily, right? That 7th hour, once we ease into Leviticus, y'all be easing out the door. We've seen enough of what we've got to see. So it's hard for us to sort of do it that way. So the point of this is to say that our spiritual progress has to be taken into our own hands. You can't rely on me, and I can't rely on you for everything. What we have to do is we have to work on this on our own. We have to take a word from right up here, train. We have to train ourselves for godliness. And so when we think about training, I want you to think about a couple of things here as we go into this. First of all, what comes to mind for you when we think about training? As somebody who always played sports and somebody who coaches now, I tend to think about athletics. And that might be for you, but it might be something else. For others, it might be considering a task at work. I know we've got people that worked in the medical field and you had to train in those jobs. I know people who here that worked at the post office and you had to train in those jobs. People who worked in factories, you had to train on those jobs. But in each case, there's two primary tasks when it comes to training. Task number one is you got to learn the basics. You know, when there's that new machine at work, they can't let you do something that somebody who's been using it for years can do. You aren't prepared for that. So we got to learn the basics. And then task two is repetition. This is something that as a school teacher, I've disheartened over the years that repetition has sort of fallen by the wayside. I think you're better to practice things over and over again. I don't care what it is. You're better at it. The first time I ever mowed the yard, I push mowed. We lived on 1295 on a fairly good-sized farm. We came home from baseball practice, and Dad said, "You're going to mow when we get home." He gave me the push mower. I can't promise you, but I think it was this wide. I don't know for sure. But he said, front yard, there was a tree on each front corner, and there was a porch in the front. He said, "You make that rectangle." Well, that's pretty simplistic. It's pretty easy. I mean, it wasn't that easy. It was 4,000 laps, I think it was, to get it. But it was pretty easy to be able to do that. But what was I doing? I was training. Why didn't he put me on the riding mower right then? I was probably 8, 9 years old. I mean, I'm not erected. We had a big ditch down in the front yard. I could have wrecked into that ditch. I could have got over into the gravel and thrown gravel against the house or broke a window, hurt somebody. I had to learn. And then the next time, I repeated the same thing. And after a while, after I had repeated the task, I had proven that I could do that. We could add a little bit more to it. That's what training is. For a Christian, these two principles are essentially the same. If we are training ourselves to be godly, if that's the goal of this lesson, then we got to learn what that actually means to start with. I have to learn the basics and then practice, repeatedly practicing. So I'm going to ask you a question. How do you train yourself to be godly? We'll get to that in a second because I'm going to put a little quiz up here in just a second. But in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 16 and 17, it says, and this is a verse that's going to be familiar to all of you, it says that all scripture is given by inspiration of God. And then it goes on to say it's profitable for doctrine, meaning that we can benefit, we can gain something by using that as our doctrine. It's profitable for reproof. Essentially, when we need to find the answer to something, we can go back in and look that answer right back up and confirm it right there. It's profitable for correction. When somebody says, "I've been doing this, is this right or wrong?" Well, I could say, "Well, I think," or "You think," but let's go find the answer. Then it says it's profitable for instruction in righteousness. Now, that the man of God may be complete, thoroughly equipped for every good work. Now, I mentioned King James and New King James, but anybody in here got an English Standard Version in hands right now? If you're holding the English Standard Version, it says, instead of instruction, it says for training in righteousness, I believe. Is that right, Ben? For training in righteousness. So if we're translating this, we are assuming that instruction and training mean the same thing. Well, there's a lot of that, right? When I teach my tennis kids how to hit certain shots, there's instruction, but there's also training. The problem is half of them hit the shot exactly right. Half of them immediately drop down to the other spot. They're not taking the instruction, and so we have to get over it. We have to talk to them again, and we say, no, it's got to be here or wherever it might be. Training is important. So this is the challenge, just as training and anything else. So when I look at these questions, I'm going to ask you a question. You don't need to answer it, but you can hold up 1, 2, 3, or 4 because you're going to have 4 options as your answer right here. I've said that, but it actually might just be 3. because I think I'm one slide ahead of ourselves. Yeah, you'll get a quiz here in a second. I was just tricking you. All right. So let's think about this. First of all, we have to remember our commitment to Christ. How many of you remember the day you were baptized? When you were baptized, whenever it was, there was a commitment that was made, right? We remember that commitment. And we have to keep that commitment in our head. Anytime we're remembering things, that's a mental training. There's a mental training that is going on in our bodies. A Christian has to train themselves mentally. I don't believe it's possible for most of us, including me, to be able to quote every Bible verse in the scripture. That's not practical. But sometimes if we're not careful, we're quoting Bible verses that aren't there because we're hearing something that we might have heard. We're kind of distorting it a little bit. But there's a mental training that goes along with our commitment to Christ. We have to practice that same commitment that we started with. Second, as part of the training, we have to set aside consistent times. I should say study, not stay, but stay would work as well, but to study and to pray. I have found in doing this job that I prefer to do the sermon earlier in the week. I usually think about it all week, and then I get to Sunday. I've kind of got plotted out what I want to anyway, but it gives me time to sort of think about some things I want to say and do and plug in and point out references I want to make or whatever. But it works better for me. I've heard Ben talk about getting to work early so he can study before work. For me, that would not be practical. I don't think I would do well studying before work, but whatever works for you works for me. The point is that we have a set aside time that we can think about this, that we can study, that we can pray, whatever it would be. In many ways, that's sort of a physical training, right? We have to block aside physical training. If I'm trying to be a better runner or a better tennis player, I have to block off time that I can go work on that. And then third, if we're training, we have to practice self-control in challenging situations. This past week, Will started for real football practice. One of the recommendations that has been made by the football coach is to drink a lot of water. Well, I like water. I don't mind to drink water, but I'm also not playing, so I can have a pot and it doesn't really matter. But the other night, Mary asked Will if he wanted something to drink. He said, no, I got a water. Well, that was self-control in a challenging situation. That's something simple, but it really is just that. Well, it may not be drinking water to get ready for football, but how many of you have certain challenges that affect you? We all do. And some of them might be small and some of them might be large. But we have challenging situations that we have to practice self-control. How many of you have been faced with a challenge? You have overcome that challenge, and whenever you overcome it, you thought, boy, I did good. You ever had that thought? Well, it'll come back tomorrow, but for right now, it feels pretty good, right? Well, that is, in many ways, an emotional training for us. We've got to get our mind sort of right as we go. So our spiritual progress then depends on our own willingness and our own effort to build a relationship with God. We have a personal duty, personal responsibility to mature and to grow. To be godly, or as close as we can be, requires self-discipline. There may be people that you know that just have never matured. It might be in regular life. It might be within the church, but they've never went to the next level or whatever it is. Well, our responsibility is to train so we can take those steps forward. Well, if we're going to train, then perhaps our best thing is to use the manual. You hold the manual in hand, all 1,400 some pages, all 770,000-ish words right there. I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to hold up number 1 if you like the first answer, number 2 if you like the second answer, number 3 or number 4. All right? Well, I ask you this question. Who, as you see on the screen, is responsible for your salvation? Again, you're not saying anything, and I wouldn't even answer the question until I've seen all my options, but that's just me. Number 1, your parents. Number 2, the preacher. Number 3, generically speaking, the church. Or number 4, you. All right? So I see some hands going up right there. So if we go to Philippians chapter 2, we'll see that the correct answer is number 4. Philippians chapter 2, verses 12 and 13, we read, "Therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, not in my presence only, but now much more in my absence," Paul writes to them, he says, "Work out your own salvation with both fear and trembling." He says, "For it is God who works in you both to will and to do for his good pleasure." So when we look at this question of responsibility right here, do all answers, does number 1, 2, and 3 play a part in your salvation? It certainly can. For a lot of us, the parent answer, we might have been brought to church by our parents the day we were born. It's also possible that your parents never walked in the church building. That doesn't excuse you. You might be the preacher is responsible for your salvation. Growing up, we went to Maple Avenue Church of Christ in Lancaster, and there was a plaque that hung on the back wall, and it listed every person who had been preacher at Maple Avenue, going back to 1927 or something, I think was when the first preacher was listed on that. I don't know. There was about 15 different names on there. Most of them stayed 2 or 3 years. If the preacher was responsible for your salvation solely, what happens when the preacher leaves? There were people that are on that list that I could talk to people who went to Maple Avenue and they could say, that was a really good preacher. And there's other people on the list that they can say, you wasn't great. You know, that's just how it is. Different people are better. The preacher plays a role, and I dare say if the preacher's up here telling you something that's wrong, they're playing a negative role, but the preacher's not solely responsible. Number 3, the church. Well, the church absolutely plays a role. The church, Dad was talking about that at going to Bible school on Wednesday night when he was little, and the church sort of wheeled them in, as it were. They've certainly played a role. But who was responsible for their salvation? It was themselves. It's you are responsible. So let me ask a second question regarding what we just read. The same thing here. I'll give you some answer choices. Don't answer it until you've seen them all. But what does it mean to work out your own salvation? Well, here's answer number 1. Fearing God. Answer 2, paying attention to our spiritual health. Answer 3, obedience to God, even when other spiritual people aren't around. Now, a minute ago, I said, hold up 1, 2, 3, or 4. I'll let you hold them up right now. 1, 2, or 3. What's the right answer here? Not as many fingers went up right there. There's a reason for that. This is a little difficult because all 3 here are correct. Bottom line, and we just read it, is that God puts the responsibility to work out your own salvation on you. That's the way it's designed. How many of you have ever said, if I want it done right, I'll just do it myself? Pat, I don't like that you waved her hand that hard right there. It might have been a knock on Pat Rice right there. We've all done that. We've all said that. For those things that don't really matter, but if I want it done right, I'll just do it myself. Sometimes how it is. Well, what if you were relying on someone else to work out your salvation? Well, there's some pretty good names that I'd be happy to draw out of the hat. But there might be some bad ones, right? Remember we used in school and you had to be partnered up with somebody and they drew it out? He's like, I'd rather just be absent than have to come here to this one, all right? Well, it might be the same way. We might draw your name out and say, oh, no, it's not going to work. Some of us might draw somebody and say, oh, this will be good right here. This will work. But we read there, and what Paul wrote to the Philippians there, is that when we start working, God works in us. But we have to start the process. Let's talk about craving for just a second. Most people who are really good at a task will say that they love it. They love to practice. They love to play. They love the competition of whatever it might would be. They thrive on that. In short, you could shorten that and say that they crave whatever it is that they're doing. There's an intense desire to do whatever it is, and they can't wait to get to it. For most of us, we may have something in our life that we crave. I'd venture to say it's probably not our job, and the longer we do the job, we probably crave it a lot less, right? We might crave the end of it. But there are things within even our jobs that we thoroughly enjoy and that we want to do more of it. There's others who like the reward, but aren't exactly dying to do the work, right? That can be disappointing for us at times. We like the reward, but maybe we don't necessarily like doing the work. In 1 Peter chapter 2, the first 3 verses, it says, "Therefore, laying aside all malice, all deceit, hypocrisy, envy, and all evil speaking," he says, "as newborn babes, desire pure milk of the word, that you may grow thereby. If indeed you have tasted that the Lord is gracious." What's he saying right here? He's saying that we should desire, or maybe we should crave godliness. We should crave, desire, strive to be as such. The pure milk in this verse can include a handful of things, I think. It can include the Bible. We should crave studying the Bible. We should crave or desire being able to pray for somebody. We should crave and desire godly advice and godly examples. Sometimes we don't like that, right? But we should, if somebody gives us advice, we should be excited to take that, especially if somebody's in the church, somebody who says, you can do this better by doing whatever. I would hope that if I say something wrong or say something stupid or approach it in a completely wrong way, that you would come straight to me when the service is over and say, I know what you're trying to go for, but let's do it this way instead. That'll make me better, and I would appreciate that from you. But bottom line is that we pursue what we desire. We have to cultivate an attitude for godly character through tasting. Notice how in that verse that Peter wrote, in those 3 verses that Peter wrote, that Peter talks about how that it's like a newborn babe. All of you probably remember either having little babies or having siblings or friends that had babies, and you've probably been there when they woke up and they are very hungry. And nothing will fix that except something to eat, right? Think about how desirous they were. Now, let's roll forward a few years. How many of you wake up and you're pretty hungry as well, right? Need something to eat right now. We don't really change from that, right? And most of us, if we're hungry, we're going to find a way to get something to eat. Well, if we're craving godliness, then we have to seek that out first. This is the 6th of what will be 7 lessons. We talk about Christian characteristics. The first 5, in many ways, have been separate actions. We talked about honesty, and we can talk about how that you or me or anybody can be honest, and we can put people in a category that he's an honest person or he's not, right? The second one was humility. And we can talk about how she is a very humble person, and she is not. The third one was grace, and how that we have to extend grace. Dad talked about this at the beginning of class this morning, about how it's difficult sometimes for us to extend grace because people hurt us, and it's hard for us to extend grace, or at least extend grace without strings attached to it. That can be really difficult. The fourth one was respect. And sometimes it's hard for us to respect certain people, certain activities, certain actions. Last month was righteousness and our efforts to be as God-like as possible. But tonight puts them all into a combined action. If we're training ourselves to be godly, we have to take all of those things and put them to work in us. I can't go to heaven because Tom Bentley's honest. I can't go to heaven because Maria is humble. That's good for them, and I might can learn something from them, but Tom Bentley's coattails aren't going to pull me into the door. I have to train myself. I have to practice. I have to put it to use in my life. Otherwise, it's not going to work. We're told to work out our own salvation. And so if that's the case, then what example can we set for others? Well, I would dare say we should reference the training manual, right? You've got it in hand. You don't got to read all 1,400 pages, but you can find some things that'll help you. If the TV tears up, you don't got to read the whole manual. You just got to find the one spot where it's going to repair it. Don't leave godliness in the pew you're sitting in, but take it with you. Wherever it is, work tomorrow, doctor's office, back porch. Speak to others in a way that would build them up rather than tear them down. You're not going to be very successful if you knock every single person that you see over. Serve without hesitation to help the church. What can I do to help the church? Might be this, might be that, might be this. But whatever it is, we can do it. If your task is to serve, and you're like, well, if Ben's not here and Johnny's not here, I guess if Leo's not here, if Pat ain't here, I guess I can do it. Well, you're just filling in because nobody else is here for it. We have to serve without hesitation. And we have to act maturely in all situations. One of the things that fascinates me in reading the Bible is we read about how Jesus came to earth and lived as a man. But it's really hard to grasp because at no point in any part of the Bible do we see Jesus act, let's just use the word bad, right? Got him. All right. At no point do we see Jesus act bad. Now, how many times have we acted bad? How many times have we acted immaturely? How many times have we put the entire foot in our entire mouth? A lot, right? We've all done it. We don't have to look or point or say we've ever one of us have done it. Well, it's not possible for us to always be perfect. But if we're training ourselves to act maturely, to act Christ-like, then it requires practice. When you did stick your foot in the mouth, next time that situation comes up, we say, I'm not going to do it that way this time. Godliness is not fully achievable. It's not possible to be fully achieved. However, it's up to us to take continual steps in that direction. And that's about all we can hope for in this situation. We'll never be perfect, but we'll never go anywhere if we refuse to take another step forward. If there's any way we can help you, we can do it. Whatever you need, we invite you to come while we stand and sing.